somewhere tonight, in this room or one very much like it, a hand is closed around something it has been holding for so long that it has forgotten it is holding anything at all. Not a hand you can see. The other kind. The one behind the ribs. The one that clenches quietly around a memory, a worry, a version of yourself you have not quite forgiven. It has been closed for so many nights that closed has started to feel like normal. Open would feel strange now. Open would feel like dropping something important. This is where we begin tonight, not with a lesson, with a hand. You may know this feeling already, the one where the body lies down, but something else stays standing. The blankets settle, the room goes quiet, the eyes close. And still, there is a low hum of things not finished, words not said right, tomorrow not yet handled. You are tired in the muscles and wide awake somewhere behind the eyes. This is not a flaw in you. This is what it looks like to be a person who has been carrying something for a while now, without quite noticing the carrying. There is an old collection of sayings, gathered long ago, small enough to fit in cupped hands, that keeps returning to a single plain observation. That so much of what troubles a mind is not the world itself, but what the mind picks up from the world and does not put down. A harsh word from years ago. A mistake that keeps replaying with new endings. A future that has not happened yet, rehearsed as though rehearsing it will make it safer. None of this is unusual. All of it is heavy. And the strange, quiet cruelty of it is that the load can grow so slowly, one small stone at a time, that we stop noticing we are carrying anything at all. We simply think, this is what tired feels like. This is what a mind is. Tonight is not about becoming someone new. You do not need to become anyone. Tonight is about noticing gently what is actually in the hands and finding out together, slowly, what it might feel like to open them. You do not need to remember anything from before this moment. You do not need to have read the old sayings or know the names of the people who first spoke them or understand any of the words that might be unfamiliar. None of that is required. All that is required tonight is a body lying down somewhere warm and a willingness to listen the way you might listen to rain, not analyzing it, just letting it fall. So let the shoulders drop just slightly, wherever they are right now. Let the jaw unclench just slightly and take one slow breath, not a special breath, not a technique, just a breath a little longer than the one before it, in, and then a soft, unhurried release. That is enough. That is already enough. There is no need tonight to try to relax on purpose. Trying to relax has a way of becoming its own small effort, its own quiet task added to a day already full of tasks. And that is not what this is for. Instead, you might simply let the body be exactly as heavy or as restless as it already is, without asking it to be any different. And let these words move around that heaviness the way water moves around a stone in a riverbed, not forcing the stone to move, just flowing past it patiently until, in its own time, the stone settles a little deeper into the current on its own. If your mind is busy right now, that is all right. It does not need to be quiet before we begin. Some nights, the mind arrives loud, full of the day's leftover noise. And that is simply what tonight looks like for you. And it is welcome here exactly as it is. You are not doing this wrong. There is no wrong way to arrive at a story meant to slow you down. If you are listening from a bed that is unfamiliar tonight, or one you have slept in 10,000 times, it makes no difference to what we are about to walk through together. Wherever you are, whatever the walls look like, whatever sounds are moving through the house or the street outside, the mind carries its things the same way in every room, in every country, in every language. This same old collection of sayings has ever been read aloud in. The weight is the same weight. The hand closed around something is the same hand. And so, wherever you are tonight, whatever kind of day brought you here, welcome. I'm glad you are here with the sleepy monk. Let us begin. Let us start with the shape of a story, because stories carry teachings more gently than lessons do. A lesson asks something of you, but a story simply keeps you company while something settles on its own. Long ago, on a road that wound between hill country and a distant grey sea, there walked a traveler with a sack on his back. It was not an unusual sack, not at first glance, canvas, worn soft at the straps, the kind every traveler on that road carried. But this traveler's sack was heavier than the others, and had been heavier for longer than he could easily remember. And he walked with a slight list to one side, the way a person walks when they have stopped noticing their own lean. Inside the sack were stones. Not large stones, each one small enough to close a fist around, but there were many of them. And stones do not become lighter for being small when there are enough of them together. He had picked up the first one so long ago that he barely remembered the day. It was from a town where he had said something he wished he had not said to someone he loved, and the stone had gone into the sack because, well, because it seemed important not to forget. The second stone came from a house where a door had once closed on him more firmly than he expected. The third, from a field where a plan had failed. And so it went, town after town, year after year. A stone for every grief, every mistake, every unkindness done to him or by him, until the sack was so full that its weight had simply become part of what walking felt like. One evening, on the outskirts of a small village where the light was turning gold and long across the fields, he stopped to rest because his shoulders had begun to burn in a way they had not before. An old woman was sitting by the roadside there, mending a net, and she watched him ease the sack from his back the way a person eases down something they are afraid to drop. "What is in the sack?" she asked him, "that makes you walk so carefully?" He told her, stone by stone, more or less, the way you might tell someone the story of your life if they asked kindly and had all evening to listen. This one is from a person I hurt. This one is from a person who hurt me. This one is from a year that went badly. He did not complain particularly. He simply explained, as though the explaining were itself a kind of proof that he had been right to carry it all. The old woman listened without interrupting, and when he was done, she asked only one question. "Do you carry these so you remember them?" she said, "or so you never have to feel the moment you first picked them up ever again, all the way through to the end?" He did not understand the question at first. She tried again, gently. "A stone remembers nothing," she said. "It only weighs. If you wanted to remember, truly remember, to let the grief move all the way through you and finish moving, you would not need the stone at all. The stone is not for remembering. The stone is for not finishing. It lets you carry the beginning of the feeling forever, so you never have to reach its end." He sat with that a long while, the sack beside him on the road, the evening cooling around them both. And then, slowly, without any ceremony, he reached in and took out the very first stone, the one from the house where the door had closed, the oldest one, the one at the very bottom that all the others had been piled on top of for years. He held it, turned it over once in his hand, let himself feel all the way through the whole shape of that old grief, not push it away, not carry it forward, just let it finish arriving, the way a wave finishes arriving on a shore. And when it had finished, he set the stone down on the road, not far from where he sat. And it was, after all, just a stone. He did not empty the whole sack that evening. That is not how it happens, and it would be a small lie to tell you it was. But he understood, for the first time in a long while, that the sack could be opened, that not every stone had to travel with him forever, that there was a difference, a real one, between remembering something and carrying it. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because so many of us are that traveler without quite knowing it. We are not carrying stones, of course. We are carrying a comment someone made about us 3 years ago that we have never quite set down. We are carrying an argument that ended, technically, but that we keep finishing again and again, in the shower, in the car, in the dark, just before sleep, giving ourselves better lines each time, as though a better line now could change what already happened then. We are carrying the version of ourselves who made the mistake, dragging her along everywhere, never quite letting her rest. None of this makes you unusual. It makes you a person with a mind, and a mind left untended is a collector. It picks things up out of habit and calls the picking up love, or responsibility, or vigilance. Anything but what it often is, which is simply not finishing. Holding the beginning of a feeling forever so as never to reach its own quiet end. It is worth being honest, gently, about why the sack fills up in the first place. It rarely happens all at once. Almost no one decides in a single dramatic moment to start carrying every hurt forever. It happens the way most heavy things happen, one small, reasonable seeming choice at a time. This one stone just for now, because the wound is still fresh. This one stone just until I understand what happened. This one just so I remember not to trust so easily again. Each stone on its own seems like such a small, sensible thing to keep. It is only much later, on some ordinary evening, that a person finally feels the whole accumulated weight of a sack filled slowly, reasonably, one small stone at a time, over years, and wonders, almost with surprise, when exactly it became so heavy to carry. So here is a small thing you might carry with you tonight, though it weighs nothing at all. The next time you notice an old stone in your hands, an old hurt, an old regret replaying, you do not have to fight it, and you do not have to solve it. You might simply let it finish. Feel it all the way through, once, gently, the way you would let a wave finish reaching the sand. And then, if you are willing, set it down. Not thrown, not buried, just set down. The way the traveler set his down on the evening road and left it there and walked on a little lighter. And now, for just a moment, let us pause here together. There is nothing to do with this. No stone to sort through tonight. No sack to empty by morning. Just let your breath find its own rhythm again, a little slower than before. Notice the weight of the blanket, if there is one, how it holds you rather than presses on you. There is nothing required of you right now except to be here, breathing, resting. When you are ready, we will walk on together. There is another kind of carrying that has less to do with the past and more to do with the present. The way we carry a moment long after the moment itself has ended. Long ago, in a mountain country where the paths were steep and the rivers ran fast with snowmelt, there lived two monks who traveled together from one monastery to another, as monks in that country sometimes did, sharing the road for company and for safety. One was older, calm in the particular way that comes from long practice, rather than from a naturally easy temperament. The other was younger, earnest, still learning to hold the many small rules of his training the way you hold a full cup, carefully, so as not to spill. One day, they came to a river swollen from recent rain, the crossing made difficult by the current, and at the bank, they found a woman in fine traveling clothes, clearly reluctant to wade in and ruin them, unsure how to cross without help. Without a word, the older monk lifted her onto his back and carried her across the swiftest part of the water, set her down safely on the far bank, bowed to her, and continued walking as though nothing unusual had happened at all. The younger monk followed, troubled. He said nothing for an hour, then 2. By the time the sun was beginning to lean toward evening, he could not hold it in any longer. "We are not meant to touch women in that way," he said. "It is against our training. How could you carry her like that, so easily, without even seeming to think about it?" The older monk walked on a few more steps before he answered. "I set her down at the river bank," he said. "Are you still carrying her?" It is a small story, almost too simple, and yet it holds something enormous inside its plainness. The older monk had done the thing, felt whatever he felt in the doing of it, and then, this is the part that matters, let it end when it ended. The younger monk had not even been part of the moment, had only witnessed it. And yet, he had been carrying it for hours, turning it over, replaying it, adding weight to something that, for everyone else involved, was already finished and set down on the riverbank hours ago. We do this too, more often than we would like to admit. Someone says something careless to us in the morning, and we are still carrying it at midnight, replaying it, refining our imagined response, though the person who said it has likely forgotten the whole exchange by lunch. We make a small mistake in front of others, and while the others have moved on entirely, we are still standing at that riverbank in our minds, still carrying the moment across again and again, though the water finished flowing past it hours ago. There was once a woman in a market town. This happens more recently than the story of the 2 monks, though not so recently that anyone remembers her name, who spent an entire evening turning over a single sentence a friend had said to her at midday, a sentence that likely meant nothing at all, said quickly, without much thought behind it. She lay in bed that night, rehearsing 5 different things she should have said in return, none of which she would ever say, because the moment for saying them had already closed like a door behind her. In the morning, exhausted from a night of carrying a conversation that had ended 12 hours earlier, she happened to see her friend again, who greeted her warmly, easily, having thought nothing more about the exchange at all. The woman realized, standing there, that she alone had kept the river crossing going all through the night, while everyone else involved had set it down at the bank and walked on. This is not a call to stop caring or to stop noticing when something lands wrong. It is something gentler than that. It is only an invitation to ask every so often, particularly at night, when the mind likes to reopen old rooms. Is this moment still happening? Or am I the only one still carrying it across the river? You might carry this with you tonight, lightly, the way you would carry something you intend to set down soon. The next time you notice yourself replaying a moment that has already ended, a conversation, a mistake, a small embarrassment, you might ask simply, is anyone else still holding this? And if the answer is no, if the water has already closed calmly behind it, you might let yourself set it down too. Not because it did not matter, only because it is already finished. And you, unlike the river, do not have to keep flowing over the same stones all night. Let us rest here together for a moment before we continue. Feel the weight of your own body where it meets the bed beneath you. The shoulders a little heavier now, the legs a little looser than they were a few minutes ago. There is nothing to carry across any river tonight. Only this breath, and then the next one. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is a particular kind of weight that comes not from what has happened, but from what we imagine other people think of us. A weight so constant for some of us that we stop feeling it as weight at all and start feeling it as simply who we are. In a village known for its cloth, there lived a weaver whose work was, by any honest measure, very fine. Her patterns were careful, her colors well chosen, her cloth strong at the seams. And yet she could hardly sit at her loom without a small, persistent voice narrating what the villagers might say when they saw the finished piece, that the pattern was too plain or too busy, that the colors did not suit the season, that a weaver 2 streets over would have done it better. She had never actually heard any villager say such things. The voice was entirely her own, borrowed from no one, and yet she carried it as faithfully as if it belonged to the whole village and had been handed to her in writing. An old teacher passed through that village one autumn, staying a few nights at the house of a relative, and the weaver, hearing of his visit, brought her latest cloth to show him, hoping, though she would not have said this aloud, for reassurance. He looked at the cloth a long while, admired it honestly, and then asked her a question that had nothing to do with the cloth at all. "Whose eyes are you weaving for?" he asked. She did not understand. He explained further. "When your hands move across the loom," he said, "whose gaze is sitting on your shoulder, watching." She thought about it, and slowly, uncomfortably, she realized the truth. She wove for a village that was not in the room. A village made up of imagined faces, imagined judgments, none of them actually present, none of them actually watching. and yet more present to her in that moment than her own hands on the thread. The teacher gave her a small task before he left. "Weave one piece," he said, "for no eyes at all. Hang it somewhere no one will ever see it. Notice, only notice, how your hands move differently when there is no one imagined in the room." She did as he asked. She wove a small piece in the evenings, told no one, hung it in a corner of her own room where only she would ever see it. And something did shift, quietly, in the weaving of it. Her hands slowed in places they had always rushed before, out of fear of being seen rushing. She tried a color she had always wanted to try but had never dared, certain the village would disapprove. She made, in short, a piece that was entirely her own, and found, strangely, that it was some of her finest work, made under no one's eyes at all. There is a boy in another story, told in another village, who loved to sing, but stopped singing aloud sometime around the age most children stop. Around the age they start to imagine an audience where there is none. He had a fine enough voice, nothing remarkable, nothing broken either. But somewhere along the way, he began to hear. Whenever he opened his mouth to sing, an imagined chorus of people noting every rough note. And so he simply stopped and sang only silently in his head for years, where no imagined audience could criticize a sound no one could hear. It was not until he was an old man, sitting by a fire with people he trusted completely, that he sang aloud again, quietly at first, and found that his voice, unremarkable as it was, brought a kind of warmth to the room that had nothing to do with how well or badly the notes were placed. He had spent so many years carrying an audience that had never actually been there. Perhaps you know this way too, the imagined eyes that watch every choice, that grade every sentence before it is spoken, that decide in advance how something will be received before anyone has actually received anything at all. It is worth asking, gently, without judgment, the same question the old teacher asked the weaver. Whose eyes are you carrying right now, and are they even in the room? So much of what exhausts a mind by the end of the day is not the day itself, but the imagined audience we carried through it, the faces we performed for that were never actually watching, the judgments we braced against that were never actually spoken. You do not have to solve this tonight. You only have to notice it. The way you might notice you have been clenching a fist for an hour without meaning to, and let the fingers loosen just slightly, just for now. Let us pause again, here, together. There is no audience in this room tonight. No one grading the way you breathe, or the way you lie in the dark, or the shape of your thoughts as they drift. Just you and the quiet, and this breath settling a little deeper into the body than the one before it. Rest here as long as you need. When you are ready, we will go on. Not everything we carry is a fear of the future or a replay of the past. Some of what weighs on us is an old version of ourselves, a mistake we made once that we have never quite allowed to become the past at all, keeping it instead in a kind of permanent present, close at hand, ready to be picked up and examined the moment we start to feel too easy about ourselves. There was a potter in a town known for its pottery who kept every piece that came out of the kiln cracked or misshapen. Most potters set such pieces aside and broke them down for clay to use again. This potter could not bring herself to do that. Instead, she kept them, one after another, in a shed behind her workshop, until the shed was crowded with broken, lopsided, failed things. A whole museum of her own worst days at the wheel. An old friend visited her one spring and, wandering out back, found the shed and stood in the doorway a long while, looking at the shelves of cracked bowls and collapsed jars. "Why do you keep these?" the friend asked. "So I remember," the potter said. "So I don't get careless. So I don't forget what happens when I rush, or when I stop paying attention, or when my hands aren't steady." The friend picked up one of the cracked bowls, turned it over in her hands, and then did something the potter did not expect. She walked out to the garden, scooped a handful of soil into the cracked bowl, and pressed a small seed into it. Something quick to grow, something ordinary. Then she set the bowl back on the shelf. "Even a cracked bowl," the friend said, "can hold something that is still alive. It does not have to sit here empty, doing nothing but proving you were careless once." The potter thought about this for a long time after her friend left. She had believed, without ever quite saying it to herself, that keeping every failed piece close was a form of honesty, a refusal to pretend she had never made mistakes. But there is a difference between honesty and punishment. And she had, somewhere along the way, confused the two. Honesty says, "Yes, I made this, and it cracked." Punishment says, "And now you must look at it every day, forever, and let it define what kind of potter you are." She began, slowly, to empty the shed. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic afternoon, but piece by piece, over a season, breaking down the truly ruined ones for clay again, and keeping only a few. The way you might keep a small scar rather than an entire museum of every wound. You may be carrying a version of yourself like that shed, full of old failures kept close. Not because keeping them serves you, but because some part of you believes that setting them down would mean forgetting, or worse, that it would mean you had gotten away with something. But a mistake does not need a permanent shrine in order to have taught you what it had to teach. You are allowed to learn from something and then let it go. You are allowed even to plant something new in the very shape of your old failure, the way the friend planted a seed in the cracked bowl and let it become something living instead of something merely broken. Here is a small thing to carry with you tonight, so light it will not keep you awake. If there is an old mistake you have been keeping in a shed somewhere in your mind, examined again and again, you might ask it gently what it was trying to teach you. And once you have heard the answer, you might let it rest. Not forgotten, just no longer on daily display. A cracked bowl, perhaps, with something small and green growing in it now, rather than a monument to the crack alone. Let us pause here, together, for a moment. Feel the bed beneath you, holding your weight the way it always does, without judgment, without keeping score of every time you have shifted or turned tonight. There is nothing broken in this room that needs fixing before sleep. Only a body, resting. Breathe in slowly. Let it go more slowly still. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a weight that comes from the past and a weight that comes from old versions of ourselves. And then there is a third kind, perhaps the most exhausting of all, because it never even has the decency to be about something that already happened. This is the weight of the future, carried in advance, again and again, as though carrying it early might somehow make it lighter when it finally arrives. There was a farmer in a country where the harvest depended entirely on rain that did not always come when it was needed, who developed the habit one particularly dry season of watching the sky every hour. He would step outside between tasks, tilt his head back, study the clouds, calculate their likely path, and step back inside, only to repeat the whole ritual less than an hour later. He was not idle. His fields were as well tended as any in the district. But something in him had grown thin and worn from all the watching, the way a rope grows thin from being pulled taut too many times. An old neighbor, resting on the fence one afternoon, as the farmer emerged for perhaps the 10th time that day to study the horizon, asked him plainly what he was doing. Watching for rain, the farmer said. Does the watching make it come sooner? The neighbor asked. The farmer admitted, after a moment, that it did not. The rain would come when it came, on its own schedule, indifferent entirely to how often he checked the sky for it. Then, what is the watching for? The neighbor asked, not unkindly. The farmer did not have a good answer. He had simply fallen into it, the way a person falls into any habit that feels, falsely, like doing something useful. The neighbor pointed out, gently, that the field itself, the soil, the young shoots already planted, the fences that needed mending, was right there, in front of him, entirely within his reach, while the sky was not and never would be. Watching the sky was not preparation. It was simply worry wearing the costume of preparation, convincing enough to fool the one doing the watching, but changing nothing at all about when the rain would come. The farmer began, after that, to limit himself, not eliminate the watching entirely, which would have been its own kind of forcing, but simply notice when he was doing it and gently return his attention to the field itself, to the part of the work that was actually his to do. The rain came eventually on its own time, exactly as it would have if he had watched the sky every minute of every day or not watched it at all. There was, in a different town, a mother whose son had gone away to work in a distant city and who developed a habit of pacing the front room each evening around the hour his letters usually arrived, though the letters, being carried by slow roads, rarely arrived at any predictable hour at all. She would pace and imagine and construct in her mind entire elaborate stories of what might have happened to him, each one more troubling than the last, none of them based on anything except the emptiness of not yet knowing. An old aunt, watching her pace one evening, finally said, "You are living an entire imagined week of bad news over and over before a single piece of real news has even arrived. Would you not rather wait simply and meet whatever comes only once, instead of 100 times in your own mind first?" The mother took this to heart, slowly, imperfectly, as these things are always taken, slowly and imperfectly, and began, in the evenings, to place her worry down for an hour at a time, the way you might place down a heavy basket to rest your arms, picking it back up again only when there was something actually to carry, rather than carrying the whole imagined future in advance, every single evening, for nothing. This is worth turning over gently in your own mind tonight. If there is a tomorrow you have been carrying early, a conversation not yet had, a result not yet known, a possibility that may never even happen. The mind likes to believe that rehearsing a hard future will make it easier when it comes. But so often, what actually happens is that we simply live the hard thing twice. Once now, in imagination, and once again, later, in reality. Paying the full cost both times, instead of only once. So here is something small to carry tonight, though it is meant, really, to help you carry less. When you notice yourself watching the sky for a rain that has not yet decided whether it is coming, when you notice yourself pacing in front of a letter that has not yet arrived, you might simply say gently to yourself, "Not yet. This is not happening yet." And you might return your hands to the part of the field that is actually yours to tend tonight, which is only this breath, this bed, this body, resting. Let us pause here together. There is no sky to watch tonight, no letter to wait for in this room. Only the quiet weight of your own body, settling a little further into rest than it was a few minutes ago. Breathe in And notice how the exhale is always a little longer, a little easier than you expect it to be. When you are ready, we will go on. Some of what we carry is heavier than worry, heavier than an old mistake, heavier even than an imagined audience. And this next teaching moves gently because it touches something tender. If it is not the right night for this part, you may simply let the words pass over you like weather without needing to hold on to any of them. There is no wrong way to listen tonight. There is an old story told in many forms across many places about a young mother who lost her only child. The grief was, as such grief always is, enormous. Too large for words, too large for comfort, too large, it seemed to her, for anyone else to understand. Because surely no one else had ever felt anything quite this large before. She carried her child through the streets of her town, going from house to house, asking at every door if anyone had a medicine that could bring him back. Of course, no one did. But one old woman, moved by her grief rather than dismissive of it, told her that there was a teacher on the edge of town who might know of such a medicine, and sent her there. The teacher listened to her with complete attention, without flinching from the size of her sorrow, and then said that, yes, there was a medicine that might help, but it required one particular ingredient. A mustard seed, he said, but not just any mustard seed. It had to come from a house that had never known loss, a house where no one had ever grieved a death. She set out at once, hopeful, going door to door through the town. At the first house, they gave her a seed gladly, but told her gently that they had lost a grandfather the winter before. At the second house, a mother had lost a child of her own years earlier, and still spoke of it softly. At the third house, a husband had been lost to illness. At every door, without exception, someone had known a loss like hers, or a loss unlike hers, but no less real for its difference. And by the time evening came, she had visited more houses than she could count. And every single one had a story of grief behind its door. She returned to the teacher without a seed, but changed all the same. Not because her grief had disappeared, it had not, and it would not for a very long time, perhaps not ever entirely. But she was no longer alone with it. She had walked through an entire town and found that every house held its own version of the very thing she believed only she was carrying. Her grief had not become smaller. It had become, in a strange and quiet way, less isolating, carried now not just by her alone, but understood somewhere, by every door she had knocked on that day. This is a difficult teaching to hold gently, because grief of any kind, the loss of someone dear, the loss of a version of a life you had planned, the loss of time, of health, of years you cannot get back, resists being made smaller and should not be made smaller. But there is something true in the mother's walk through the town that is worth carrying. If you are carrying grief of your own tonight, it is this: the belief that your grief makes you alone is almost always a trick of the grief itself, not a fact about the world. Every door, it turns out, if you knocked on it, would have its own story. You do not have to carry your grief as though it is a private failure, a sign that something is wrong specifically with you, that the world has singled you out unfairly while sparing everyone else. Every house on that road had lost something. Every person you pass tomorrow is carrying a version of this too, quietly behind an ordinary face, the way you are carrying yours. This does not erase what you carry. It simply means you are not carrying it in a house alone at the edge of an empty road, however much it may feel that way at 3 in the morning. If this is your grief tonight, you do not have to fix it or finish it or understand it before sleep comes. You only have to know that it does not make you strange or singled out or broken in a way no one else has ever been broken. It makes you a person who loved something or someone enough for the loss of it to matter this much. That is not a flaw. That is, in its own difficult way, evidence of how deeply you were capable of caring. Let us rest here a while, gently, together. If there is grief in the room with you tonight, let it be here without needing to be solved. You do not have to carry it alone tonight. Even in the quiet of your own room, it is being carried in some form in more houses than you know. Breathe slowly. Let the body soften wherever it is holding on the most. When you are ready, in your own time, we will continue. There is a different kind of heaviness now, one many of us know well, though it wears a hotter coat than grief. The weight of carrying anger, sometimes for years, at someone who may not even remember what they did. There is an old teaching that compares holding on to anger to picking up a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. Before it ever reaches its target, it has already burned the hand that is holding it. This is plain, almost too plain. And yet, how many of us have held such a coal for years, certain that the burning was somehow proof of how right we were, or how wronged we had been, never quite noticing that the only hand actually being burned night after night was our own. There was a craftsman in a town of many craftsmen who had once been cheated by another craftsman, a matter of a debt never repaid, an agreement broken without apology. It was, by any measure, an unfair thing that had happened to him, and no teaching here would suggest otherwise. But the craftsman carried that unfairness for years afterward, in a very particular way. He built, without quite meaning to, an entire second workshop in his mind, a place devoted entirely to tending the memory of the wrong done to him, adding fuel to it whenever he saw the other craftsmen across the market, rehearsing the confrontation he never had, refining the case against the man a little more each night before sleep. Years passed. The other craftsmen, as it turned out, had mostly forgotten the whole affair, had moved to a different trade, thought little of the old debt, carried none of the weight the first craftsman assumed he must be carrying too. An old friend, noticing how tired the craftsman had grown, how much of his evenings were spent in that second workshop tending a fire that warmed no one, finally said to him, "You have built and maintained an entire second business for years now, and its only product is your own exhaustion. The man you are angry at does not even know the shop exists." The craftsman was startled by this, and then, slowly, ashamed, not of having been angry, which was reasonable enough given what had happened, but of having kept the anger burning for so long till it had stopped serving any purpose except to keep him tired. Letting it go, he came to understand, was not a gift he would be giving to the man who had wronged him. That man would likely never even know the coal had been set down. Letting it go was a gift only to himself, the closing of a second workshop that had been draining his hours and his sleep for years, in service of nothing but its own fire. This does not mean every anger should be released instantly, or that what was done to you did not matter, or that forgiveness, if that is even the word you want tonight, must arrive on any particular schedule. Some coals need to be looked at fully before they can be set down. Some wrongs deserve to be named plainly, not rushed past. But it is worth asking gently of any anger you have been carrying a long while. Who is actually being burned by this fire tonight, right now? Very often, the answer is only you, tending a workshop that the other person forgot existed years ago. There is a quieter version of this same fire too, one that never involves another person at all. The anger we sometimes carry toward circumstances themselves, toward an illness, an accident, a plain stretch of bad luck that no one caused and no one can be blamed for. This kind of coal is, in some ways, the hardest to set down because there is no one to confront, no apology that could ever arrive to make the setting down feel earned. And yet, the same plain truth holds even here. The weather does not know it is being resented. The illness does not feel the weight of the grudge held against it. Only the one holding the coal ever feels its heat, whether the fire is aimed at a person or at fate itself, or at nothing in particular at all. So here is something small to carry with you tonight, though it is really an invitation to carry less. If there is a coal you have been holding, you do not have to throw it tonight, and you do not have to forgive it tonight either, if forgiveness is not yet available to you. You might simply notice for a moment whose hand is actually burning, and you might ask whether the fire still needs tending tonight, or whether it could rest just for these few hours while you rest too. Let us pause here together, gently. There is no coal to hold in this room right now, only the quiet dark and the sound of your own breath, slower now than it was when we began this part of the journey. Let the hands, wherever they are resting, soften completely. Nothing to hold, nothing to throw, nothing to tend tonight. When you are ready, we will continue on. There is one more weight worth naming tonight, quieter than the others, harder to see because it disguises itself as simple honesty about ourselves. This is the weight of the voice that is always finding fault, the one that looks at a whole day well lived and finds, somehow, the one small thing that was not quite good enough. There was an apprentice studying under an old potter, perhaps even the very potter from the shed of cracked bowls, though this was a different town, and so perhaps not, who could not seem to finish any piece without immediately listing everything wrong with it. The handle was slightly uneven. The glaze had pooled a little too thickly on one side. The base was not quite centered. Piece after piece, month after month, he produced work that was, by any outside measure, quite fine, steady, well-formed, improving with each attempt. And yet, he greeted every single one the same way, with a list of its failures, recited almost before the piece had even cooled. One day, the old teacher set a plain, ordinary bowl in front of him, not one of the apprentice's own, just a bowl from the household shelf, used for rice most evenings, and asked him what was wrong with it. The apprentice studied it a long while, turning it in his hands, searching. Nothing, he finally admitted. It's just a bowl. It does what a bowl does. Then why? The teacher asked. Can you look at this ordinary bowl and see nothing wrong, but you cannot look at your own work, which is finer than this bowl in every way, without finding fault in it, before your hands have even finished setting it down? The apprentice had no answer. The teacher offered one anyway, gently. You have been trained, he said, to find fault. Not because fault is always there, but because finding it has come to feel, to you, like proof that you are paying attention, like proof that you care about your work. But looking for what is wrong is not the same as seeing clearly. Sometimes it is simply a habit, worn smooth by repetition, that has nothing left to do with the object in front of you at all. This is worth sitting with tonight, if you are someone, and many of us are, more than we say aloud, who cannot finish a day without reciting, almost out of habit, everything that was not quite good enough about it. The email that could have been better worded. The moment of patience that ran out 5 minutes too soon. The task left undone. It can feel, in the moment, like honesty, like humility, like simply being accurate about yourself. But so often, it is only a habit, worn smooth over years, that finds fault the way water finds the lowest point in a field. Not because the fault is always the truest thing there, but because the path has been carved so deep by now that everything runs toward it automatically. You are allowed to look at your own day the way the apprentice looked at the plain household bowl, without searching immediately for what is wrong, simply seeing for a moment what is actually there. A day lived, a body that carried you through it, things done imperfectly, the way all things done by human hands are done imperfectly, and none the worse for that. Here is something small to carry with you tonight. So small, it will barely register as a weight at all. Before sleep tonight, you might try looking at your day the way you would look at an ordinary bowl. Not searching for the crack, not listing the failures, just seeing it plainly as a day that happened, carried by a person doing their best with what they had. Nothing wrong with it that needs finding tonight. Just a day, just a bowl, just enough. Let us pause here, together, one more time. Feel how much heavier the eyelids have grown since we began, how much further the body has sunk into whatever is holding it tonight. There is no fault to find in this moment, nothing to fix, nothing to improve, nothing to grade. Only rest, arriving in its own quiet way. When you are ready, we will gather everything together, gently, before we close. There is a weight that comes from being needed, and it disguises itself so well as love or duty or simple usefulness that many people carry it for a whole lifetime without ever once setting it down long enough to notice how heavy it has become. There was a woman who kept an inn at a crossing of two roads, in a place where travelers of every kind pass through. Merchants, pilgrims, families moving from one town to another, the occasional wanderer with nowhere in particular to be. She had run the inn since she was young, had inherited it from her own mother, and had come, over the years, to believe, quietly and without ever examining the belief, that the inn could not run for even a single evening without her standing at its center. She rose before the sun and settled the fires last, long after the final guest had gone to bed. She had not, in longer than she could easily say, sat down for an entire meal without also watching the door. One winter, a guest stayed several nights running, an old traveler who noticed, as travelers who stay a while sometimes do, the particular tiredness that had settled into the innkeeper's face. Not the tiredness of hard work alone, but the tiredness of a person who has never once believed the world would hold together without her holding it. What would happen? The traveler asked her one evening. If you closed the door at sundown just once and let the fire burn low and sat with your own supper the way your guests sit with theirs? She laughed at first, as though the question was somehow foolish. The inn would lose custom, she said. Someone would arrive at a locked door and go elsewhere. Word would spread that the inn was unreliable. And if that happened once, the traveler asked, what, exactly, would be lost that could not be found again the next evening when the door opened as it always had? She did not have a good answer, and the not having of a good answer sat with her longer than she expected. That night, for the first time in more years than she could count, she closed the door a little early, banked the fire, and ate her own supper slowly at her own table without watching for the latch to lift. Nothing terrible happened. A traveler arriving late found the door closed and, finding a bench outside, sheltered from the wind, simply waited until morning, mildly inconvenienced, nothing more. The world she had been holding up with such vigilance, it turned out, could bear the weight of one closed door for one single evening, the same as it always could have. This is a heavier kind of carrying than it first appears, because it wears the clothing of goodness, being needed, being relied upon, being the one who holds everything together. And there is real love in that, real care. Nothing here suggests otherwise. But carried without any rest at all, being needed can become its own kind of stone in the sack, indistinguishable after enough years from simple exhaustion pretending to be virtue. You are allowed to close the door some evenings. You are allowed to believe, even just for one night, that the people and the tasks that depend on you will still be standing in the morning, whether or not you kept watch over every single hour of the dark. If you are someone who has been keeping an inn of your own, a household, a family, a job, a role that seems to require your constant presence in order to keep from collapsing, you might carry this small thought with you tonight. The door can close for one evening. The fire can burn low. And in the morning, more often than the tired mind believes possible, everything is still there, exactly as it was, having managed quietly without your standing guard over every hour of its keeping. Let us pause here together for a moment. There is no door to watch tonight, no fire that needs tending by your hand alone. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been holding themselves up out of habit for longer than tonight requires. The room will hold itself together while you rest. When you are ready, we will continue. There is another weight, quieter still, that comes from measuring your own garden against a neighbor's, a habit so ordinary that most of us do not even notice we are doing it. The way you do not notice breathing until something makes it difficult. There were two gardeners in neighboring plots at the edge of a village who had, over many seasons, developed very different relationships to the same simple work. One gardener, whenever he walked out to tend his rose in the early morning, found his eyes drifting first to the fence and past it, to what his neighbor had managed to grow. A taller stand of beans, a fuller row of greens, a fruit tree that had come into bearing a season earlier than his own. He would return to his own soil afterward with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the actual state of his garden, which was, in truth, healthy and well tended, and everything to do with the comparison he had just made before even beginning his own day's work. The other gardener, older, having tended the same plot for many more years, walked out each morning and looked only at what was in front of him: the soil, the small shoots, the particular weeds that had come up overnight, and worked from there, without once glancing over the fence to measure his progress against anyone else's. One afternoon, the younger gardener, worn down by a summer of quiet comparison, finally asked the older one how he managed to tend his rose so steadily season after season, without ever seeming discouraged. "I am not growing the same garden as anyone else," the old gardener said. "My soil is not his soil. My seasons of rain and drought have not matched his exactly. Not in 15 years of tending this ground. If I measure my beans against his beans, I'm not actually looking at my beans at all. I'm looking at a comparison which is not a living thing and cannot be watered and cannot be helped to grow no matter how long I stare at it over the fence." The younger gardener sat with this a long while. He began slowly the following season to catch himself in the moment of glancing toward the fence and to gently redirect his eyes back to his own rose, not out of discipline exactly, more the way you might redirect a wandering dog back toward a familiar path, patiently, without scolding it too harshly for wandering. It did not happen all at once, but over time, his mornings grew lighter, not because his garden had changed especially, but because he had stopped carrying, in addition to the actual work of tending it, the entirely separate and much heavier work of constantly weighing it against a garden that was never his to grow in the first place. This is worth turning over gently tonight. If you have found yourself, at some point today or any day, measuring your own life against a neighboring one glimpsed only from a distance, a house, a career, a family, a body, a pace of life that looks, from over the fence, fuller or easier or further along than your own. You are not growing that garden. You never were. Your soil has had its own seasons of rain and drought, unseen by anyone standing outside the fence. And the comparison, however natural it feels, is not a living thing you are tending. It is only a heaviness you are choosing to add to rows that were already, on their own, enough work to carry. So here is something small to set down tonight, if you have been carrying it without meaning to. The next time your eyes drift towards someone else's garden, You might simply notice the drifting gently, the way you would notice a wandering thought during a quiet moment, and bring your attention back to your own soil, your own small shoots, your own particular morning, which is, after all, the only garden that has ever actually been yours to tend. Let us rest here together for a moment. There is no fence in this room tonight, no garden to measure against another. Only your own breath, your own body, your own quiet unfolding, entirely its own, entirely enough. When you are ready, we will go on. There is one more kind of weight worth naming before we begin to gather everything together. The weight of words left unsaid, carried for years, in the hope that someday, somehow, the right moment will arrive to finally say them. There was a carpenter whose father had also been a carpenter, a quiet man, exacting in his craft, sparing with praise the way some men of his generation believed praise ought to be spared, as though it were a resource that could run out if given too freely. The son grew up wanting, more than almost anything, to hear his father say plainly that the work was good, that he was proud, that the years of sawdust and careful joinery had amounted to something worth saying aloud. The words never came, not in any form the son could point to clearly. And by the time the father grew old and then passed from this life, the son had carried for decades an entire conversation he had always meant to have. Someday, when the moment felt right, a moment that, as it turned out, never arrived at all. He carried this unspoken conversation for years afterward, replaying it in his mind the way you might replay a piece of music you never quite finished learning, always circling back to the same unresolved note. An old friend, noticing how much of the carpenter's quiet moments were spent somewhere else entirely, not in the workshop in front of him, but in an old conversation that had never happened and now never could, finally asked him gently what it was he still needed to say. The carpenter told him plainly for the first time aloud that he had wanted only once to hear that the work was good, that he was proud too of his father, though he had never said that either, that there had been so much left unsaid between them, that it had come to feel over the years like the unsaid things were the only real conversation they had ever actually had. The friend listened and then said something the carpenter had not expected. "You do not need your father to hear this," he said, "in order for you to finally be allowed to say it. Say it now. Say it to me, or to the empty workshop, or to the sky." The words do not lose their truth simply because the person you first wanted to hear them cannot hear them anymore. The carpenter, hesitant at first, began to speak the words he had carried so long, awkwardly, quietly, in the emptiness of his own workshop one evening, with no one there to witness it but the tools on the wall and the dust in the evening light. It did not undo the years of silence between himself and his father. It did not grant him the conversation he had always wanted. But something in him did finally loosen. The particular tightness of carrying words that had nowhere to go. For years, waiting for a door that had, without his quite realizing it, already closed. You may be carrying words like this tonight. Something you meant to say to someone who can no longer hear it, or who is simply no longer in a place in your life where saying it feels possible. It is worth knowing gently that the words do not require the other person's presence in order to be released. You are allowed to say them anyway, aloud, in a quiet room, to no one, to the dark, to whoever or whatever you trust to hold them. The saying does the work. The listener, as it turns out, was never quite as necessary to the setting down as we tend to believe. Let us pause here together, one final time before we gather everything we have walked through tonight. If there are unspoken words resting somewhere in you, you do not have to say them tonight. And you do not have to hold them either. Simply notice they are there, gently, the way you would notice an old friend in a room, without needing to do anything about it right this moment. Breathe. Let the shoulders come down a little further. When you are ready, we will bring tonight's journey to its close. There is one last weight worth naming, quieter than all the others, so quiet that many of us have never once heard it named aloud, though we carry it every single night, right up until the moment sleep finally takes it from us by force. This is the belief that rest must be earned, that the body is not allowed to soften, to let go, to simply stop until some invisible ledger has been balanced, some final task checked, some sufficient measure of the day's worth proven first. There was a young apprentice in a house of many trades who had been taught from very early on that a day was only as good as what it produced. His teacher, an otherwise gentle man, had a habit, at the end of each day, of listing aloud everything that had been accomplished. The wood cut, the orders filled, the errands run, as though the tallying itself were a kind of prayer, a way of proving that the day had been permitted to happen at all. The apprentice absorbed this without ever being told to, the way children absorb almost everything. And by the time he was grown, he could not lie down at night without first running his own silent tally. Had he done enough? Had he earned the stopping? Had the day produced sufficient proof of its own worth before he was allowed to let it go? This meant that even on nights when his body was exhausted, when every reasonable measure would have said the day had been full and complete, some part of him lay awake a little longer, auditing, searching for the one task left undone that might disqualify him from resting fully. Sleep, when it came, arrived not as something given, but as something he had, each night, anxiously proven himself worthy of. An old woman who lived nearby, who had known him since he was small, noticed one evening how heavily he sat by his own door, still turning over the day's ledger long after the work itself had ended. She asked him what he was doing. "Making sure I've earned tonight," he told her, only half joking. She was quiet a moment, and then she asked him something that stayed with him a long while afterward. "Does a field earn the night?" she asked, "before the sun is permitted to set on it? Does a river earn the stillness of the evening before it is allowed to grow calm? Or does the night simply come to the field and the river and every tired thing in between, whether or not anyone has judged them worthy first?" He did not have an answer for her, not that evening. But the question worked on him slowly, the way water works on stone, not through force, but through patience and repetition. He began to notice, over time, the exact moment each night when the silent ledger opened in his mind, and to ask himself gently whether a field needed to earn its evening before it was allowed to have one. Slowly, imperfectly, the way all real change happens, he began to let the night simply arrive. Some evenings, without first demanding proof that he deserved it. This is, perhaps, the heaviest thing many of us carry without ever naming it. Not a memory, not a fear, not even a grudge, but a quiet, constant sense that rest is a reward to be earned rather than a need to be met. The way food is a need, the way water is a need, the way breath itself is a need that no one has ever had to prove worthy of first. You would not ask your lungs to earn their next breath by first justifying the one before it. And yet, how often has the mind asked exactly that of sleep, demanded a full accounting of the day's worth before allowing the body to simply, finally, let go? You do not have to earn tonight. Whatever the day held, however much was finished, however much was left for tomorrow, however far short of some invisible measure it may have fallen, the night does not check your ledger before it arrives. It comes the same way it comes to the field, to the river, to every tired thing under the same sky, without asking first whether you have done enough to deserve it. So here, at the very edge of tonight's journey, is perhaps the simplest thing to carry. And even this, you are free to set down the moment it has done its work. You are allowed to rest tonight, fully, without first producing proof. Not because the day was perfect, not because every task was finished, simply because you are a tired body in need of rest, and that, on its own, without any further justification required, has always been enough. Let us pause here together, one final time, before we gather everything into a quiet close. There is no ledger to balance tonight, nothing to prove, nothing left to justify. Only the body, finally allowed to stop, the way a field is allowed to stop at evening without ever once being asked to explain itself. Breathe in slowly. Let it go more slowly still. When you are ready, we will bring tonight's walk to its gentle end. We have walked through a great many rooms tonight, a road with a sack of stones, a river crossing carried long after the water closed over it, a loom worked under eyes that were never actually watching, a shed of cracked bowls, a farmer studying a sky that would rain in its own time regardless, a mother walking door to door and finding grief behind everyone, a coal held too long by a hand that forgot it was burning, a plain bowl that had nothing wrong with it at all, a closed door that the world could bear for one evening, a garden tended without glancing over the fence, words finally spoken to an empty room that had waited years to hear them, and, just now, a field that never once had to earn its own evening. It is worth asking now, gently, what all of this has been pointing toward. Underneath the different images and different voices, there was, in a small house at the edge of an ordinary town, an old woman who lived alone, who had, over many years, without ever studying any of these teachings, without ever hearing the story of the traveler or the two monks or the weaver or the potter, simply learned in her own quiet way how to carry less. Each evening, she closed her small shop a little earlier than she needed to, because the last hour of trying to catch every possible customer had never once in all her years been worth the tiredness it cost her. She let the day's small disappointments, a sale not made, a customer short with her, a delivery that had not arrived, settle and finish. The way a wave finishes on a shore, rather than replaying them long into the evening. She did not check the sky for rain that had not yet decided to come, nor pace in front of news that had not yet arrived. She tended, instead, only what was in front of her: the kettle, the small fire, the chair by the window. If someone had wronged her that day, she let herself feel it fully, once, and did not build a second shop in her mind to keep the fire burning past its use. And when she looked back over her own day, she did not comb it for faults the way some of us do out of habit. She simply let it be a day, imperfect and complete, the way a bowl is a bowl. She had, at some point in her life, closed a door early, the way the innkeeper eventually learned to. She had, at some point, stopped measuring her own small shop against the finer shops on the wider street across town, the way the younger gardener stopped measuring his rows against his neighbors. There were words she had never said to people who could no longer hear them, and she had learned, in her own quiet way, to say what needed saying to the evening air instead of carrying it forever unspoken. And when the day's work was done, however much or little it had amounted to, She allowed herself the evening without first demanding of herself some final proof that she had earned it, the way a field does not have to earn its own dusk. None of this made her remarkable in the way the world usually measures remarkable. She was not known beyond her small street. She had not read the old sayings or heard the story of the traveler or ever once used a word like carrying to describe what she had learned to do. But in the evenings, sitting with her tea, hands wrapped around the warm cup, she carried almost nothing. Not because nothing had ever happened to her. She had lost people, been wronged, made mistakes, watched years pass that she could not get back, same as anyone. But because she had learned slowly, the way all of us learn slowly if we learn it at all, the difference between remembering something and carrying it. If you had asked her how she had come to live so lightly, she likely would not have had a tidy answer. She might have said only that she had gotten tired somewhere along the way of holding so many things so tightly, and had simply one day begun to loosen her grip a little and found that the world did not fall apart when she did. This is, in the end, closer to how most of us actually learn to set things down than any of the neat teachings can fully capture. Not in one dramatic evening of insight, but in 1,000 small loosenings over years, each one so quiet it barely felt like anything was happening at all. This is what all of tonight's small stories have been circling from different angles, the way different paths up the same mountain still arrive at the same quiet summit. The traveler with his sack of stones, learning that a stone is for not finishing, and that a feeling led all the way through does not need to be carried forever to be honored. The monk who set the woman down at the river bank and did not carry her a step further, showing that a moment can end completely, even when the mind wants so badly to keep it going. The weaver working for no eyes at all, discovering that the audience she had been performing for had never actually been in the room. The potter planting something living in a cracked bowl instead of keeping it as a monument to the crack. Learning that a mistake can be a place where something new grows, rather than a shrine that must be visited daily. The farmer tending his field instead of the sky, and the mother learning door by door that she was never alone in her grief, however much the grief itself had insisted otherwise. The craftsman closing a second workshop that warmed no one but himself, and the apprentice learning to see a whole day the way he saw a plain, ordinary bowl. Nothing wrong with it, simply there, simply enough. The innkeeper discovering that a closed door for one evening does not undo years of careful keeping. The gardener learning that his own soil, tended on its own terms, never needed to be measured against a neighbor's to be worth tending. The carpenter finally speaking the words he had saved for a door that had already closed, and finding that the speaking itself, not the hearing, was what set them down. and the field at the very last, that never once had to earn its own evening before the sun was permitted to set on it. Nothing left to carry does not mean nothing ever happened to you. It does not mean you feel nothing, remember nothing, care about nothing. It means something gentler and something far more possible than perfect peace. It means holding what happens the way open hands hold water rather than the way a clenched fist holds a stone. Water still passes through open hands. You still feel it, still know it was there, still are changed by having held it. But it moves through, rather than being gripped so tightly that the grip itself becomes the only thing you can feel anymore. You already know how to do this, somewhere in you, even if it does not feel that way tonight. You have already set things down before, without meaning to, without noticing. An old worry from years ago that you no longer even think of as a worry. An old hurt that has simply become a fact about your history rather than a live coal in your hand. You have already been, at times, the old woman with her tea, hands open, carrying almost nothing. You are not being asked to learn something entirely new tonight. You are only being reminded of something you have already known how to do, more times than you remember doing it. So as we come toward the close of this first walk together, know that you do not need to remember the traveler, or the two monks, or the weaver, or any of the small stories we passed through tonight. They have already done what they came to do, simply by being heard. You do not need to hold on to them the way you might have once held on to everything else. Let them go the way the traveler let his stone go on the evening road, gently, without ceremony, already having given you what they had to give. We have walked a long way together tonight, further than it might have seemed, from a hand closed quietly around something at the very beginning, to hands open now, or opening however slowly, however slightly, however much further they still have to go before they rest completely. You do not have to remember any of the images we passed through, not the sack of stones, not the river, not the loom, not the cracked bowl, not the sky the farmer no longer needed to watch, not the mustard seed, not the coal, not the plain bowl with nothing wrong with it, not the closed door, not the garden, not the unspoken words, not the field that never had to earn its own evening. None of it needs to be retained. None of it is a test you will be asked about in the morning. It has already settled into you the way rain settles into ground, quietly, beneath the surface, doing its work without needing to be watched or remembered doing it. You can let every single image go now, the way you let go of a hand you have been holding all evening, gently, without ceremony, trusting it can find its own way from here. There is nothing left for you to do tonight, nothing to fix before sleep, nothing to solve, nothing to carry forward into tomorrow that you are not also free to set down completely, right here, in this dark, quiet room. Whatever stones you brought into this evening, you are allowed to leave a few of them here, on this road, tonight, and see, in the morning, whether you miss their weight at all. Most nights, you will not. Most mornings, the stones you were so certain you needed reveal themselves in the light, to have been smaller than they felt in the dark and easier to leave behind than you feared. If your mind returns in these last few minutes to any part of tonight's journey, a stone, a river, a coal, a closed door, you do not have to follow it anywhere. You can simply notice it passing, the way you would notice a light moving across a ceiling, there and then gone. Nothing to chase, nothing to hold on to. Let it drift past. There will always be another night to walk further if you want to. Tonight asks nothing more of you than this. Let your hands, wherever they are resting, be entirely open now. Nothing in them, nothing needed in them. Let the shoulders finish the long, slow work of coming down that they have been doing this whole time. A little more with every breath. Let the jaw soften completely. Let the space between the eyebrows, which so often holds more tension than we ever notice, simply unclench. The way a fist finally opens after being closed for far too long. Let the breath continue on its own now, the way it always has, without your needing to manage it or notice it, or do anything with it at all. It has been breathing you, quietly, this entire time, long before tonight began, and long after this recording ends. And it will go on doing so faithfully, asking nothing of you in return. Let the body sink the rest of the way into whatever is holding it, the mattress, the pillow, the quiet dark of the room, the way a stone finally sinks all the way to the bottom of still water and rests there, undisturbed, and does not have to rise again tonight, or answer to anyone, or prove anything at all before morning. There is nowhere you need to be right now. There is nothing you need to solve tonight, and nothing you failed to solve that cannot wait, unharmed, until you are rested enough to look at it again with clearer eyes. There is nothing left to carry, only this breath, and the next one, a little slower, and the dark holding you the way it has held every tired person who has ever lain down at the end of a long day. And finally, let go. Sleep well. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with the sleepy monk tonight. Rest now, exactly as you are, exactly where you are. We will walk together again another night.